Good morning and good afternoon for the audience that is joining us from Latin America, and hello to others joining us from different parts of the world. Welcome to this fireside chat, which will touch on one of the most important um, spectrum discussions going on globally, I believe. Um, I am very glad to be joined today by leading experts in the discussions around the 6 GHz band, representing companies that are part of the ecosystem. I'd like to introduce in first place Jennifer McCarthy, Vice President of Legal Advocacy at Federated Wireless. Hi, Jennifer. Good morning to you.
Good
Thanks
morning.
for joining us. Uh, Christopher Simansky, Director of Product Marketing and Government Affairs with Broadcom. Hi, Chris. How are you? Good morning. Finally, Guillaume Lebon, joining us from Europe. I'm part of the Global Connectivity Policy team at Facebook. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. So let's start this discussion. We're talking about when we talk about the 6 GHz band, we're talking about basically 1200 megahertz of spectrum. Um, there have been some calls for splitting the band, some calls for a balanced approach to the band. Um, whereby in this vision, the first the lower part of the band can be used for Wi-Fi, whereas the upper part of the band, the 700 megahertz in the upper part, can be used for IMT. What's your perspective on this? If I can start, perhaps with you, Chris Imansky, is this for games? Is this a first split?
Yeah. Hey, Chris. Thanks a lot for the question. So, Broadcom's been looking at mid-band spectrum for both IMT and for Wi-Fi for years. And when we look at what makes sense from a technical perspective, we try to understand, what are the key performance indicators for both technologies. For IMT, you need to have enough power and range to provide ubiquitous coverage at a decent price point. For Wi-Fi, having something that's proximate to other bands so that people can put in a new Wi-Fi node where they already had a Wi-Fi node and expand the bandwidth makes it far more accessible to a common market, reduces the price point. We don't see how any type of split in any way would help consumers worldwide or any administration. When we think about IMT, we think about lower. If we're talking about mid-band, we think sub 5 gigahertz. That makes sense to us. Propagation characteristics are better. Countries around the world are harmonizing. In the upper part of the 6 gigahertz band, technical studies have shown that sharing can be challenging outdoor at powers above 36 dBm. So administrations would be forced to make a decision on whether to allow satellite coverage, fixed service coverage, or provide IMT. So, we think that on the whole, governments who would like to bring immersive wireless broadband experience quickly to their citizens are going to end up following the lead in the US and in Brazil, where the spectrum is being made available for Wi-Fi rather than waiting a number of years trying to figure out where to put incumbents that are currently operating in the band and doing this whole shuffle. So it really, the proposal does not make technical sense to Broadcom. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Now that you opened the discussion about sort of the comparison between the benefits of one technology versus the other, how they complement each other, Wi-Fi 6 and 5G on the other hand. Wi-Fi 6 is clearly suited for uh, indoor, perhaps some local area deployments, and has defined use cases. But at the same time, it operates on license exempted spectrum, unlicensed spectrum, basically. Uh, so some voices point to this as an argument to say that it's quality of service, reliability cannot be guaranteed. Um, and this connects, I think, to a very important issue as well, which has to do with the security of the networks, and that is increasingly becoming a topic in policy discussions in Latin America. Uh, can I get your perspective on this? Perhaps from Jennifer, Guillaume, if you want to also talk a little bit about this, we'll be happy to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, obviously, we're talking about different technologies, licensed IMT versus unlicensed Wi-Fi, or even unlicensed IMT, which I believe is being actively considered for the 6 GHz band as well, and we shouldn't forget that that's a possibility. But there are different applications, as you say. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of background noise. I'm not sure if it's coming from me or from somebody else. Oh, that's better. Thank you. So at any rate, I do think we have to look at the use cases each type of system is looking to to support, and that, as you said, there will be complementary combinations of licensed IMT, unlicensed IMT, as well as Wi-Fi. And again, as you said, finding the right balance in terms of the amount of spectrum that we're making available for each service is going to be important. That being said, there are a lot of bands that, as Chris mentioned, below 6 GHz where licensed IMT services are anticipating that they'll go. 3 GHz in particular is is a big band for licensed IMT at the moment, and a lot of countries are clearing spectrum in that band and auctioning it off for IMT services. Whereas I do think that having more spectrum available for unlicensed is a good complement and a good balance. We've got to look at, though, as also mentioned, what is the cost of and pain of trying to clear the 6 GHz band of incumbents to really make licensed IMT work, as opposed to working within the unlicensed framework and allowing NRU, for example, to get deployed. I do think there is a cost benefit trade-off there that has to be considered.
Okay, can we say, thank you, Jennifer, can we say that 5G is a more reliable technology than Wi-Fi 6E? Can we say that it's a more secure technology? What would you offer on that, folks?
So, Guillaume, I'm happy to take a stab or defer to you.
Go for it.
So, when we talk about security, it's important to understand security protocols evolve over time, typically through a responsible security disclosure process. So you're going to see security evolve for both cellular IMT technologies, and you're going to see security evolve for Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi's most recent security protocol is called WPA3. It's far more secure than previous iterations of Wi-Fi security. And then on top of that, you'll have enterprise grade features that build on a layer cake approach to security. So, one of the interesting things about Wi-Fi is it's something that can be deployed and it's very ubiquitous, and there are ways to tailor it based upon the needs. So if you were in a secure installation with, classified security clearance, you can have Wi-Fi protocols and security that will meet those needs. Or if you're serving, wireless broadband at a cafe on the roadside, you can have security protocols that will meet those needs. But I would say that security is evolving for both types of technologies. And when people make these comparisons of one against the other, Broadcom believes that that's a false premise. We believe that cellular 5G and unlicensed technology such as Wi-Fi or 5G NRU, as Jennifer was talking about, together collectively will meet these use cases. And they're going to have to both evolve. As new security threats come out, they're going to have to evolve, and security will improve. But I do not believe that one technology is inherently more secure than the other.
Thank you for sharing that. Let me, let's take the position of or try to think how regulators are evaluating this proposition, right? And they are trying to find the pros and cons, obviously, of adopting national rules for unlicensed use or license exempt use in the 6 GHz band. I think one of the concerns that they have raised is that allowing for unlicensed use throughout the 6 GHz band will make it difficult for them to reverse the decision. It's once made, devices proliferate everywhere, and there's no way back. What do you have to say to this? I mean, it seems to me, has this happened with the other, with 2.4 and 5 GHz band? Will this be a concern? What would be the answer to that? If you want to take on that, Guillaume, and perhaps complement Chris.
I don't think it's an issue which is specific to the unlicensed devices. What has been visible is that the unlicensed devices have been using bands in a shared manner with other services. And so, of course, when you use a band in a shared manner, it's more complex than IMT, which enters a band and removes all other applications from the band. But I mean, you could take the other argument, try to find one IMT band which has been freed and used for another service. It also doesn't exist. So it's more like having a direction of history which so far has made that the IMT bands are getting fuller and fuller, the Wi-Fi band are getting fuller and fuller, and therefore we need more spectrum. So it's not yet in a position to free up spectrum, whether it's IMT or Wi-Fi. We just have more traffic coming on and we need more spectrum. But I don't think it's a question of the specificities of Wi-Fi or specificities of IMT. It's just that people keep using these devices, and it's about the actual usage. If one day people stop using 2.4 because they're mostly relying on 6 gigahertz because they got better performance over there, then naturally it's going to happen. But it's not something linked to the unlicensed nature of the band. It's really just linked to how the services evolved over time.
Any complementary comment on that from Broadcom or Federated Wireless, indeed?
I think Guillaume did a great job covering that. It's very hard to remove, current services that are delivering value. So if the question is, do we expect unlicensed airwaves to deliver a significant amount of value and to create a massive amount of economic pain? If that's removed, then yes, Broadcom would say it's tremendously difficult to remove these unlicensed services. But services evolve over time. Allocations that are done in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 10 years ago need to be revisited. Governments need to determine whether or not their wireless needs are being met. And so I would say that if unlicensed designations or license exempt designations are sticky and hard to change, it's because it's delivering tremendous economic value, and I don't see that being a problem.
Okay, that's clear. Please, Jennifer.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to mention, obviously in the CBRS band in the United States, we have an IMT systems that are sharing frequencies with incumbent services, and you can have your cake and eat it too that way. But I think it's going to be very dependent whether that regime can be replicated based on the nature of the incumbents. I mean, if the incumbents are ubiquitous and really need access to the spectrum all the time in a lot of densely populated areas where the first IMT systems would be deployed, I'm not sure that how effective that sort of sharing might be, as opposed to what we have in CBRS, where obviously the military users are itinerant. They're mostly, located in certain ports along the coast of the United States. And then we also have some fixed satellite service earth stations, but they are not as ubiquitous as, say, the 6 gigahertz incumbents, particularly the point-to-point microwave links, of which there are over 100,000 in the United States. So it kind of depends on the nature of the incumbents, how widespread they are, how frequently they're using the spectrum, to figure out whether or not sharing with an IMT system is really feasible versus this lower power unlicensed approach, where I think there can be more compatibility, particularly if you're looking at wider swaths of spectrum like the 1200 here at 6 gigahertz, as opposed to 150 in CBRS, where everything's a lot tighter and a lot more squished as well.
Jennifer, among all those points that you make, very good points. I think you touch on one of the most critical ones. Again, when you trying to think, I'm an ex-regulator, so trying to come in from that perspective. From a technical analysis, what at the end of the day, what matters is if new services can coexist with existing ones, right? How is that? Can you broadly explain, folks, what's the compatibility ecosystem here? What's the what services are at play? I think broadly speaking, we're talking about fixed satellite services, fixed services. There is that mobile service allocation as well, and then this angle of using the band for Wi-Fi or wireless applications. I know there have been some studies for some time these studies have been done in different geographies. It will be very interesting, I think, from our audience in Latin America to try to understand, from that technical analysis, what are the outcomes? What can we say? Perhaps Guillaume, you want to offer something on this?
Sure, absolutely. So let's start with the satellite, and it's very clear that running to the WRC 15, there was this idea of having IMT in the band, and there were lots of studies that were done at that time. It was based on LTE. And the result was that the only way that IMT could operate in that band while protecting the satellite services was to be indoor with something like 23 dBm, so roughly what we do with Wi-Fi. And that's no problem. So if IMT wants to have some kind of small cells with terminal in that band, it's not an issue. But as soon as you were going outdoor, there's a problem. Now, the discussion is whether the situation is changing fundamentally with 5G. And smart antenna, they give you roughly 20 dB of discrimination between, back lobe and front lobe and these kind of things. The problem is that you have to cover up for 40 to 50 dB to come back with the kind of power that you want for a base station and the kind of interference avoidance towards a satellite. So for the satellite, I mean, I don't know what the study will say at the end, but if I had to bet today, I would say that it's going to be extremely difficult, and we're going to see that the only way that IMT can operate in the band is with much lower power than they can in 3438. So that's the first point. And the second point, which is really important, is fixed service. So Chris and I, we were in CPT groups looking at this coexistence in the lower 6 gigahertz band. And already there was some concern from some countries that Wi-Fi, within the buildings, it's already difficult, even though there's a indoor to outdoor difference and all these kind of things. It's already difficult to make sure that the fixed links are protected. And that's why we had 23 dBm, we try not to go too high to make sure that there's no problem for the fixed link. Now imagine if you want to introduce IMT in the band, your 23 dBm, that's what your terminal, like a smartphone like this, is doing. And it's not indoor, it's outdoor. So what is clear is that if you want to have IMT in the band, it won't be about protecting the fixed service. It would be about removing the fixed service from the band. There would be no compatibility possible. And so even the notion of a split that we've been discussing, the reason why we have these two bands in Europe, it wasn't to have some kind of balance between Wi-Fi and IMT. It was just because they wanted to make sure there was a core band where the fixed service would have no risk of interference whatsoever. And though you can see that they will not decide to put IMT in that band because they want to keep the fixed service there. So long term, if the fixed service moves somewhere else, perhaps anything is possible. But at the time, if you want to protect the fixed service and the fixed service wants to operate in the band, you need to go for something lower power, indoor. It doesn't matter whether it's Wi-Fi or IMT, but it's small cells and it's terminals.
Right. Okay, that I think that also connects us to precisely the international discussion on the band. I think there have been recently very important developments. I'm very happy to say that many of them have been driven by Latin American spectrum regulators. But we have seen also important discussions and conclusions of those discussions. I think in Europe, in one part of the band, there are important benchmarks in Asia and elsewhere. So let's start. Let's start perhaps. With the first mover in this case, Jennifer, if you want to comment a little bit about the FCC, the FCC decision, I think was adopted in March. Just how that set up the sort of, I think, the international discussion on this, and what was broadly speaking decided in that rule, and I think also what else the FCC is looking at this point.
If I may, I'd love to defer this to Chris, since he is truly the expert on this band and everything having to do with the rules. And maybe I can comment more on the AFC outdoor standard power operations, since that's a little bit more of our expertise. Chris, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Chris. So just taking a step back, Chris, I'm going to blend in an answer to your question and kind of build on what Guillaume talked about. When the industry got together, we got together from chip makers to mobile operating system vendors. So the whole panoply of companies in the value chain, thinking about what services we want to deliver. And when you think about unlicensed spectrum in general, technologies like Wi-Fi, the premise is first do no harm, right? These existing services need to be able to grow and flourish. And so I almost want to give you an analogy like Tetris. Do you remember that video game Tetris, where you have these different shapes come down and you've got to kind of clear these shapes and build them together like a puzzle? Think of this as like Tetris. We have fixed service that are there now, and there's going to be new fixed services that are installed. They need to grow. You've got satellite service that's there now, and there's going to be additional satellites and new use cases that will be handled through satellite services. You've got electronic news gathering services. So there's a variety of these services that are in the band now. We got together and we thought, what value can we create without displacing or dislodging these services? You like fixed service? Great. Have more fixed service in your country. You want more satellite? Great. So we came up with really 3 classes of equipment. And the classes, like I said before, I think is outdoor standard power, and then indoor low power and very low power portable. And what we've been doing is working really worldwide on ensuring that those classes have the rules necessary to enable investment and deliver value. And we're starting to really see global momentum on this. So, the US, as you know, moved forward first with allocating all 1200 megahertz of spectrum for indoor and outdoor standard power. It did not include very low power portable, because it began a little bit earlier. There was a very solid record on those other 2. And so the FCC was eager to allow devices to be deployed, and it opened up a further notice of proposed rulemaking on very low power. Europe began just a little bit later than the US. And in Europe, as you know, they work in a block of 48 countries through the CEPT. So there's a lot of people sitting at that table, a lot of diverse views. And so it had a chance to work on indoor low power. Outdoor standard power may happen at some point when there's a harmonized database and the information's available from all the countries. But because it started a little bit later, Europe was really able to look at the value that could be created through very low power portable devices. And we expect the European rules to include both low power indoor and very low power portable. And while Europe moved on the bottom part of the 6 gigahertz band, It was largely for a couple of different reasons. One, fixed links in the 2 gigahertz band were being moved to the upper part of the band. How can you study something that doesn't exist yet? Those links are in transition. In addition, there are some administrations that have higher availability links in the upper part of the band. They wanted to understand how these unlicensed technologies could coexist with the lower part of the band, and then take that learning and then decide what to do on the upper part. So when you see kind of that staggered approach, it's not that Europe necessarily wants to do IMT. I think they want to understand what technology will deliver value. But then you saw Korea. And Korea was a very, very interesting case, because Korea went right out and they said, okay, I see 2 different regimes. I see how the US moved forward on a power spectral density basis. And I'm going to allocate low power indoor devices allocation very similar to how the US did. And they wanted to optimize for bandwidth. And at the same time, they said, I really like what Europe is doing on the very low power portable devices. And they implemented rules that maximize total power. And so it's funny, it was almost like a la carte. They took the best of the rules from the US for indoor low power and the best of the rules from Europe for very low power portable. And we fully expect them at some point to enable a standard power outdoor, because they also have a database. You have Chile that just allocated 1200 megahertz for indoor low power. And you know, the United Kingdom that is allocated. So what we're seeing is already a lot of global momentum, not just in one region, but really all over. And we're seeing, you know, tons of new rulemakings beginning. So, you know, really excited about this, and really excited that some of this is going to be available for Wi-Fi 6E devices, which we expect to be launched really in full force beginning next year.
Thanks for sharing that, Chris. I think so I think some people point out to the fact that specifically in the context of Europe being within Region 1, and in the given the existence of what is agenda item 1.2 as part of the World Radio Conference, which is looking precisely at this band, segments of this band, among others. The discussion in Europe has also been influenced by that. To which extent is this true, Guillaume? You have been as well in these discussions. You know, what you can say about this? I mean, what happened back in WRC 19? What is the position of European countries generally on the upper 700 megahertz of the 1200 megahertz that we are discussing?
I don't know whether I can speak about the position of the European country now, but so historically what happened is really this notion of the lower was really about protection of a fixed service. That is clear. And when you going into the conference, the European countries were not really open to study the top part of the band for IMT. Now, it's important to understand why Region 1 moved with this agenda item. And the reason is that countries like Russia or some countries in Africa do not have the C-band. So when you go back to the question that you were asking yourself at the start, what does it mean for a regulator? If you're a regulator, you really want to have a nice mid-band for 5G, and for most countries in the world, it's 3.4 to 4.2, and a nice mid-band for Wi-Fi. And for most countries in the world, it's a 6 gigahertz band. Now the question is, of course, if you don't have the C-band, then your whole world is upside down, and you don't know where you're going to start your 5G. And that's where the interest of Russia kicks in, the interest of some African countries kicks in, because they have so much satellite in the C-band that it's difficult for them to have really a wide band freed up for 5G. For Latin America country, I mean, for them, it should be more of a no-brainer, having 3.4 to 3.6 or 3.4 to 3.7. They can get to 100 megahertz per operator for 5G, which really enables them to have high-performance 5G networks. And then, of course, they will have the ability to have, you know, a good 1 gigahertz of spectrum for Wi-Fi and 6 gigahertz. It's kind of where the major ecosystem will be. They don't have to go out of their way because of the constraints in Russia and Africa. It's really the natural way forward. But literally, I mean, this agenda item The other thing that you should remember about the agenda item is it's just an IMT identification. So every country can do what they want today. It's just a way to have more of an ecosystem growing in 6 gigahertz precisely for countries that cannot implement 5G in the C-band.
The international framework is surely very important. I suppose that if we ask the ITU, whether the Wi-Fi industry should be discussing this in within the ITUR, they will welcome that. I think the Wi-Fi industry has been very successful in bringing these topics to the regulatory agendas of countries worldwide, and there is absolutely nothing in the rules that is preventing them to do that. On the contrary, what let me just try to sorry, I will move on a little bit about to talk about the market. I think what it will be useful for our audience to try to understand as well is what have been the sort of technological and market developments that are making now the 6 gigahertz band available and attractive for wireless applications. Can you mention that you represent companies that have different products, different services in this ecosystem, and I think it will be useful to our audience to hear a little bit from a market perspective. I will go back now to after this to the regulatory discussion. But if you can help me with that, please. You want to start with that, perhaps from a chip manufacturer perspective, Broadcom, Chris?
Yeah, sure, Chris. Thanks for the question. So, as we think about, all of the components in, getting data from a data center to a user, that whole, communications path. One of the paths that we've been most focused on is how do you deliver immersive services to the end user? So, you've got operators that are investing massively on fiber and, DOCSIS and GFast and all of these backhaul technologies. And, companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon are investing heavily in the data center with switches that allow all of this communication to move at massive speeds. And we now have the backbone, and we're building the backbone to provide more.
Sorry, I think we lost Chris. We lost Chris. Okay. Would you like to?
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I got booted. I guess I was taking too long.
Just for a few seconds, Chris. No worries. Please continue.
So, one of the things that this band provides is it provides access to wide channels. So let's say that I'm a consumer and I have a gigabit speed at my home, or 200 or 300 megabits per second. Is it worth it for me to invest in that faster internet connection if I can open up an email a nanosecond faster, or my web page opens a nanosecond faster? I don't know. But if I can provide a whole new service real time, where instead of watching a YouTube video about fishing, I can be watching it and learning how to skin that fish while I'm training my child how to fish. Or I'm, looking at a car and I understand how to, rotate the tires or whatever, right? I'm changing the oil. So instead of having to watch a YouTube video, I'm doing it live. What we see here is the ability to have a more immersive experience, a contextual internet through this technology, so that you're not just looking at a static screen, but you're experiencing the digitization in sort of the ordinary course of life. you need really, really, really low latency and high throughput to do that. And that's part of the 5G services vision. So if I have a cellular, 5G, and I'm operating on 4 gigahertz, say, or 3.6 gigahertz, and I got a gigabit per second to my phone, so what, Chris? What are you going to do with that if all I can do is look at that on my phone? What service can it provide? But if I can sling it to glasses, a TV, if I can multicast as a teacher to everybody else in the classroom, life gets exciting. If I can have smart speakers talk at all parts of the house and providing a different immersive experience. So this is the type of technology that we believe that Broadcom can be unleashed in the 6 gigahertz band. And so very, very excited about that, excited about the wide bandwidth and how it's really going to help operator investments materialize.
Is there any, we're in Latin America, one of the most unequal regions in the world, and the digital divide and the bridging that should continue, and is one of the main policy discussions when it comes to spectrum. Is there an angle to that here when we talk about the 6 gigahertz? I've heard a lot about how this can help for augmented and reality and virtual reality, and other industrial use cases. That's certainly very relevant. Is there any application of the 6 gigahertz band as the one that the Wi-Fi community is proposing that can help to connect more people, those regions that perhaps have not been connected yet? Do you want to offer something on this, folks? Whoever wants to take it.
Well, I think the first thing is that it's not having a second 5G band is going to allow you to bridge a digital divide. Like, if you want to bridge a digital divide, go to villages where they don't have 5G, give them 5G on the C band, and you're going to close the gap, right? So villages where you can't have one layer of 5G, there's no point having a second layer of 5G. And the second aspect, and I'm going to pass it to Jennifer straight away, is what's possible under the FCC rules with AFC, and she's a lot more a specialist than I am for that.
Yeah, well, I think that's where we look to higher power levels, standard power, and outdoor operations, which the FCC rules do allow in 2 of the uni subbands in 6 gigahertz. And obviously, higher power outdoor operations have a greater chance of interfering with the incumbents, and therefore the FCC has decided that use of an automated frequency coordination system, a database-enabled sharing capability, is necessary to make sure that we don't accidentally cause interference to those incumbents. So that's federated wireless. That's our bailiwick. What we do is enable database sharing solutions. And I do think that there are opportunities for some digital divide to be met, using these unlicensed. Obviously, we're going to have to figure out what the backhaul link will be, whether that's going to be satellite or if you can provide some other, reliable but not too costly backhaul capability. But then using outdoor, higher power unlicensed to provide services to a village, to part of a village. To a community center. I think there are, lots of use cases that can be explored using the 6 gigahertz band, to support, bridging the digital divide in that way.
Thank you, Jennifer. This concept, this automated frequency controller that you're talking about, I think in some regulators' mind, this makes them think about that TV white space discussion, and that sort of introduce a concept of geolocation databases. And in some ways, that discussion was very complex for some regulators to come up with the right rules, to come up with the right understanding of how can that be applicable, right? Can you offer a commentary on this? I mean, is that different now? Why?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think we'd like to look at what's going on in the CBRS band and what will be going on at 6 gigahertz as spectrum sharing 2.0 relative to TV white spaces. TV white spaces is an earlier version of a database-enabled sharing scheme, which is great if you've got enough spectrum and in your country and you're in the broadcasting bands. There could be very good opportunities there. One of the weaknesses of the TV white space sharing model is the requirements that were put on the equipment, and that kind of limited the ecosystem development to a certain extent. Whereas what we're planning to do or what we are doing in CBRS and what we're planning to do in 6 gigahertz does not impact the equipment design. We are communicating with standard ultimately licensed 5G and CBRS and standard Wi-Fi and standard 5G NRU devices, using protocols that are already in place for updating and communicating with those devices for firmware upgrades, et cetera. So we're not actually putting any new physical hardware requirements on these devices, and are therefore able to take advantage of the economies of scale that are developing in those bands. And I think that you're going to see a much greater uptake of sharing because of that than what we've had in TV white spaces, where again there was a greater burden on the device ecosystem to create something kind of unique in order to enable sharing. So I think it's going to be a lot simpler. I think it's going to be a lot more cost effective and a lot more widespread as a result.
And I'm sure that will clarify a lot of the questions that the regulators have on this. So thanks for sharing that, folks. We have 2 minutes to close the show. So I like that you give me your sort of 30 seconds wrap up takeaways. Let me be unpolite and start with mine. I think there is momentum in the region. In LATAM, we have open proceedings on 6 gigahertz, basically from north to south. Following the US, we know that Canada is studying the possibility of opening the band for LPI in first instance. Brazil is doing the same. Colombia, Mexico just last week, I believe, just opened a consultation looking at the entire 1200 megahertz band. Peru and Costa Rica are doing the same, and a great example coming out of Chile, the first country in the region in LATAM, adopting rules for LPI in the entire band. So that will be my takeaway. With that, I like to hear from you guys, just your 30-40 seconds takeaway. If I may start with Jennifer, please.
Well, thank you. So no, I think it's great, the momentum that is starting to build for 6 gigahertz unlicensed devices, and low power indoor is a great way to start. I would encourage regulators, though, to think beyond that and make sure that all of the different device classes are going to be enabled, including standard power and outdoor operations, in parts of the band where we can make that work. The AFC is ready to go. They don't need to worry about certifying it or developing it. We'll do that here in the United States, make sure that it's working, and we can adapt it to the situation on the ground in each of the other countries. But the complexities associated with the AFC should not be an impediment to countries considering all of the device classes in addition to LPI.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for joining us. Chris, 30 seconds.
Thanks, Chris. Well, first, thanks again for having me. And I would just say that, would encourage Latin American countries to continue to think about the value that the current services are delivering. Are they meeting a specific need for their market? And thinking about ways to complement that through this unlicensed designation. It's not an either or. This is beautiful because it's an and. And, if the rules are largely aligned with what the US is doing, you create this great big common market which is fantastic for scale, developing new services, allowing it to come to market faster, and keeping the price down. So in pretty much every way, we really like to see all this momentum that's happening. Would love to see this continue to be harmonized in the region. And as Broadcom, we're happy to answer any questions anyone has about any of the technical studies or how we see the market maturing. But very excited about what's happening.
Thank you, Chris. You have the last word, Guillaume, from Facebook side.
Thank you. Well, to deliver our service, we really need a bit of everything. So we need fixed wireless access, we need 5G, we need Wi-Fi, and we need this personal area network from your phone to your AR, VR glasses. And the way to look at it is quite simple. We know which band we're going to have for 5G, 3.4 to 3.7, and then the regulators have two options in front of them. They can have a second layer of 5G in 6 gigahertz, but that means they wouldn't have fixed wireless access, they wouldn't have Wi-Fi, and they wouldn't have this personal area network. And then it's no good for us because we can't deliver our services. Or they think about the 6 gigahertz for these three things combined. So the kind of services that Jennifer can deliver, the personal area network, and the radio LAN in the 6 gigahertz band to complement IMT in the 3.4, 3.7. So for us, it sounds like a no-brainer for the countries that have got access to the C-band for 5G.
Okay, thank you very much, the three of you, for sharing these interesting thoughts. I think this will inform tremendously the discussion going on in LATAM and other regions. And thank you, Forum Global, for this space. And I'll see you the next time. Good afternoon and good morning to those in LATAM. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.
Thank you.